The ideas enshrined in the preamble, it is believed, is the leitmotif of all the engagements throughout the debates of the Constituent Assembly. That was, in a sense, the lodestar. But is that really the case? Some people say it's Ambedkar's preamble. Others say it's a much wider consultative process. Achyut believes that many of those ideas were already there, and it was a question of actually picking out the best among those many strands and refining them and crystallizing them in a pithy form that was accessible to we the people. But what do we really mean when we say we the people enact, adopt, and give to ourselves this constitution? So there are, of course, several issues involved. People say there's another debate that says that the idea of fraternity has been least explored both in policy and praxis. And everyone talks about liberty and equality as though equality has been realized. But do we need fraternity the most today in these troubled times? Professor Chandok will say she's uncomfortable with the word fraternity because it's already laden with patriarchy. So do we want to call it something else? But be that as it may, it is about the question of how will we continue to coexist as peoples, as diverse peoples, proud of our several identities, and yet be able to come into a collective space of debate, discussion, dignified dissent, and reclaim the Constitution for ourselves and for our fellow citizens or sister citizens, as it may be. So there are several issues involved, and I don't intend to speak on any of them because the people on the dais are far, far better informed. But the question is, how do we look at the Equality Code today? What about the debates on the nature of the state? There have been very, very spirited interventions by women about the overweening state and how it needs to be contained and controlled, about unlawful preventive detentions, about the rights of prisoners, decentralization with emphasis, which is something that women always wanted. How did the directive principles actually get in there? What was women's voice and activity in that regard? Secularism is, of course, a favorite theme for everybody. How do we understand secularism today? And the whole idea of how do we live as citizens, even as we do in this part of the world, even as it is for us. Religion is a very palpable reality of everyday living. Can we dismiss it? Look at it purely as the opiate of the people? Or is there a more nuanced approach to this? And should there be? The other two aspects that will be addressed today is the whole idea of the Recovery of Abducted Women's Act. I think one of you raised it. And the conundrums, the inconsistencies, and the feminists. There's a huge feminist discussion and debate on that, starting from Kamla Bhasin and Ritu Menon's landmark book, as many of you know, and many others have followed since then, and the idea of internationalism. But also the reason why we have today a distinguished political scientist like Neera Chandok is not only because she's written so many books, not only because she's been a riveting teacher, not only because she has offered a new syntax to Indian political science and Indian political theory, but because she's deeply invested in these ideas, and that secularism, as she understands it, or active coexistence, even coexistence is a very term word, has been the warp and weft of her consciousness. And she uses her pen. It's a mighty pen that she wields to speak, not just cerebrally, but also to speak from the heart. And I will share her formal biodata with you. A friend, and before that I do want to say, a friend of mine once told me that, I haven't written to you for a long time Because if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. And I've pondered over that several times and said, yes, absolutely. Unless you have distilled experiences where it can become almost like a mantra to you, you will ramble on and on and on and on and will never actually communicate. There is a kind of communication that comes from that 1,000-time riyaz idea. You have to play a raga 1,000 times before you can actually. And I believe that Professor Neera Chandok has done that. And why do I say that? A friend of mine who is a member of parliament, unfortunately will have to remain unnamed, who's also a prolific writer on matters on governance and also the constitution, among other things, told me a few months ago that, look, I've been asked by this publisher to write a very, very pithy account of the Indian constitution. And this is something that should speak to everybody. So I asked him, I said, have you read Neera Chandok's We the People? He said, no, I haven't. I know Neera Chandok. I said, who doesn't? But I know Neera Chandok, but I haven't read it. My sense is he probably went back and read it and said, I can't better that. And probably he was stopped in his tracks from writing that book or emerging on that. And the reason I say it, and I would commend this to all of you, I think you absolutely, each one of us, must have a personal copy of this book called We the People. It's, you read it day in, day out, you'll find new nuggets in it. Not only about what it says, but about how it says it. And Achyut, you are a student of literature. There is heart there, there's poetry there, there is flow there, there is also the ability to be vulnerable there. There's the ability to open yourself up to criticism and not forcibly have to wear labels of either, she was seen largely as a Marxist scholar. And later some people were not very sure whether she's a feminist scholar or not. But the point is that she actually defies all labels about herself in this book. Which means there is a true inner Swaraj process that is happening. She doesn't need to be labeled. She doesn't have to wear her mantra on her sleeve and shout it out from the rooftop. It's an excellent piece of writing. And it's so accessible. The language is something that even a child can pick up, and 8-year-old can pick up, and they'll read new things to it. So I'll commend this book to you, We the People. That's why I think it's an honor to have her, in a sense, bring this lovely orchestra to its crescendo today. But I'll now read her formal biodata. I've known Neera for several years. I've had the privilege to know her for several years. And I have actually watched in wonderment her own trajectory. How she has constantly been engaging with conversations with herself. Never content to rest on her laurels, which many of them are so richly deserved. But always, the Neera, and today Achyut made a very profound statement, which I think Pericles had said many centuries ago, that you never step into the same river twice. If the river changes, you change. When you step in, you come out, you're somebody else. I can't find many people I know to whom this applies as much as it does to Neera Chandok. And therefore, my admiration for her, my respect for her, even though I disagree with her on some of her stands, has grown over the years. So I'd just like for us to just bring our hands together and give her a big applause and thank you for her time. So now for the formal. She's an eminent political scientist. I'd like to call her a public intellectual. And she's a distinguished fellow at the Center for Equity Studies. She formerly served as Professor of Political Science and Director of the DCRC at the University of Delhi. She has held several prestigious visiting fellowships, including at the Center for Study of Law and Governance at JNU, the Center for Ethics and Global Politics at Lewis University, Rome, the Center for Civil Society at the London School of Economics. She was awarded the Mosca Fellowship at the University of Turin, Italy, and where else but Turin would you celebrate Mosca, and has been a JNU Fellow, a noted scholar on secularism, violence, and democracy. Through this book, you will also read a lot of Hindustani, neither cliched Hindi nor too much of the Arabized Urdu, but you'll read a lot of Hindustani here, and it'll really resonate with each one of us who reads it and rereads it. This publication, I think, I personally feel, is the most beautiful piece of work she's written. Of course, she's written very impressive pieces of work. Some things that are very impressive may not always be beautiful in that sense of the term. She's also written about peace through reconciliation, violence in our bones, mapping the deadly fault lines within Indian society. That was the angry young Neera. This is the mellowed wine that you would see. Okay. Anxieties of coexistence, contested secessions, beyond secularism, and so on and so on and so on. She's a regular contributor to the Hindu and the Wire, and that itself tells you which part of the fence she sits on, and she doesn't sit on a fence, that I know. The Indian Express, the Tribune, and her work remains foundational in shaping contemporary debates on democracy, pluralism, and social justice. So none of you should have gone through your years at university without having had the privilege of being in Neera Chandok's class. But since we can't simulate a classroom today, we'll try and come as close to it as possible. So over to Neera and Achyut. Achyut will walk us also through the first slide he did yesterday, so that for some of you who were not here, you're able to place a name to a face and the background of the particular person. But over to Neera, the floor is entirely yours, and thank you again for doing us this favor. I had to drag her away from, I think, the 101st book she's writing or whatever, but she made time for us. So thank you, Neera. I'm really deeply touched. Thank you.
Junior to me, and when I joined teaching in Lady Shri Ram College, she was the president of the college, and subsequently she became a colleague and somebody again who I greatly admire and have a lot of affection for. She is extremely generous, and this showed how generous she is. Okay, because we are very short of time, I'll start the first question. Sorry, as a political theorist, I'm used to contextualizing a question. So very briefly, Achyut, I want to ask you, December 1946, the Constituent Assembly meets. August 1946, the Calcutta riots have already taken place. And August 1947, July, August, September, we have these gruesome, awful killings, particularly in Punjab. I mean, I belong to Punjab. I was born after partition, but I kept thinking Punjab didn't even want partition, and it was the worst affected. The poet Aguirre sat on piles of luggage or on the benches of railway stations from August to November 1947 and scripted the inhumanity of man to man. And I'll just quote one of his sentences to you. He said, "Mere desh ko mirgi ka daura pad gaya." We are all caught in an epileptic fit. What is happening? In the middle of this, women who were abused and mutilated and raped raped once again, who lost their limbs. When you read them, you literally, when I wrote Violence in Our Bones and I was looking at the violence of the partition, my knees used to start shaking. In the middle of this, the Constituent Assembly drafting a constitution. And it's a testimony to the wisdom of men and women in that assembly that we got a democratic constitution. Because it could have easily become a Hindu constitution, given the partition. So there was one thing at the personal biographies of the women who were a part of the Constituent Assembly. The other is watching their friends, their sisters, their families being massacred. Both sides of the border. Let me put it this way, both sides of the border. Bapsi Sidhwa, if you read her novel, will tell you what happened in Pakistan. And in that context of the partition of India, I ask the first question: did women members of the Constituent Assembly have a distinct moral imagination, a constitutional morality grounded in a lived experience that has been neglected by the post colonial nation?
Thank you. Even I was not prepared for this. I thought I will just have a discussion with the participants. I think this is something that we need to excavate. The first thing is to remember. I mean, the women members of the Constituent Assembly were part of a women's movement, and this movement was a pan-Indian movement, and this movement did not agree to the partition of India.
Did not agree.
Did not agree to the partition of India. There are at least 3 instances that I can cite. When the cabinet mission came to India, and when Hansa Mehta was interviewed by the cabinet mission, she was asked these questions: that how many of your, what is the composition of Muslim women in your organization? And she said that we do not count Hindu and Muslim as members. But since you want to know, we have had 4 presidents of the AIWC who were Muslim women. And as an organization, we have always been against partition. We have against been this two-nation theory. So this is 1946. But before that, there was a context, so it's not as easy, because Hansa Mehta probably did not agree with the partition, but there were some members of the AIWC and other women's organizations who were taken in by the two-nation theory, who believed that Pakistan needs to be formed. Begum Jahanara Shahnawaz gave speeches on behalf of Jinnah, and she actually left AIWC to join the partition movement. So this was something that was happening. There have been notes of dissent, again, since we're talking about notes of dissent since morning, within AIWC, when a number of women members, particularly from, I remember one particular instance from women of Surat, the Surat branch of AIWC, they wrote a note of dissent against Hansa Mehta, against the president of the AIWC, saying, how did you say that we do not want the partition? We do not agree with the position that the organization is officially taken. So this is one aspect of the thing. They were against partition. The one member, I mean, I don't know what is your position on this, but I believe all of us somehow believe that Gandhi did not want the partition. At least he did not. And so I also see the women members of the Constituent Assembly as in some or the other way indirectly representing Gandhi's voice. The one member who is very actively involved in these debates on communal questions is Renuka Ray. At the time of the beginning of the Constituent Assembly's work, she was actually with Gandhi at Noakhali. And she had imbibed, internalized a lot of his politics of communal harmony, of bringing people together, and so on. She joined the Constituent Assembly much later, when after partition. So she was not part of the initial discussions, but she had brought in that particular experience. This also continued in her life, citing one example of Renuka Ray. Later on, she became the Refugee Rehabilitation Minister of West Bengal. She lost her election, and this is something that probably would be interesting for all of us to note, that in the 1952 elections to the Lok Sabha, all the women members who had drafted the Indian Constitution, they lost their elections, except Amrit Kaur. All of them lost their elections. And interestingly, Renuka Ray lost her election to a Hindu Mahasabha leader. So this is very clear that these women were considered as anti-right-wing Hindu nationalism from the very beginning. They were anti-communal, they had an anti-communal position. The second question is about the lived experiences. So because, I mean, this is a very difficult thing to excavate from the debates. But there's one debate which we wanted to enact today, which was on the Abducted Women's Recovery Bill. So again, there were 2 positions on this. One was a position which is, I believe, the position that the women of the Constituent Assembly might have taken, which was the position of Rameshwari Nehru. And that was a senior, that was a position of the senior members of the women's movement then, who believed that the nation is an artificial divide, and this has been suddenly imposed or thrusted upon us. And the women of this country, or the women of India, have now suddenly been faced with a new kind of a situation. So we should allow the women to take their own time to decide how they want to respond to this, and not force an official narrative, an official imperative for them to join the newly formed nation states against their will, whatever may have been the experience of violence that they have suffered. So this is something that happened. The other was a statist position, which was represented by Amrullah Sarabhai. The document that we looked at in the morning, the women's role in planned economy, and these are very interesting paradoxes, I believe. So that document was largely authored by Amrullah Sarabhai. So on questions of work and labor, she was very, I would say she was radical. She was far to the left. But on questions of community, on questions of communal relations, on the relationship between community and nation, she was probably, I would say, not so radical. But the other women, Hansa Mehta, Renuka Ray, Purnima Banerjee, whose arguments I cited yesterday, who fought for, as I say, that if we return to these women of the Constituent Assembly, we also create a kind of effective turn to constitutional history, because they bring into these debates the relationship between Hindu men and Muslim women, or Hindu women and Muslim men. They talk about love, they talk about relationships, they talk about marriages which have been formed on emotional basis rather than community basis, and so on. Yeah. So,
just to add to your very, very interesting comment, I must confess this is something very, very refreshing to hear, that the women's movements were against partition. You know, at the turn of the 20th century, in Urdu literature and poetry, they began a big reformist movement. And the sign of that reformist movement was in the 1930s in a short novel called Angare. It caused a furore. There was Ahmad Ali, there was Sajjad Zahir, there was Mahmood Zafar and Rashid Jahan, who were upper class Shia aristocrats, all from Oxford and Cambridge. And they were of the feeling that social reform movements took up the gender issue but did not go far enough. So they took up, particularly Rashid Jahan, who was mercilessly castigated by the ulema and by the others. It is an issue of women's sexuality being controlled by men. Now, in 1936, when the Progressive Writers Association is formed, Premchand gives the inaugural in Urdu, much to the dislike of his Hindi-speaking colleagues. The issue of fighting against patriarchy comes up in a very big way. They were more radical probably than any other group. And if you speak to Hindi people who have written on Hindi literature, they say, yes, Hindi literature authors were not they never took up the issue of patriarchy, but let alone women's sexuality. So in a way, this paves the way for my, infinitely the PWA, which consisted of the most important poets, who later became the poets of our Bombay film industry. So you have the most meaningful poetry in the 50s and the 60s, particularly Sahib Radianvi or Majrooh Sultanpuri. The next question comes, that they went so much but did not go far away. The attitude, patriarchy being an ideology, it can also absorb women in its toils. And you see many women who would be completely talking the language of patriarchy without even knowing it. How does that moral imagination of women who were in the Constituent Assembly speak to us today?
That's it would require, I think, a very long answer. And but I think most of the questions that we grapple with today, and the feminist movement grapples with today, I mean, they may not have the entire answer to those questions, but they had initiated some of those questions. And the terms that I find very important, the emphasis that I find very important, one is the emphasis on future. So something that I again mentioned yesterday, that at least till 1950, and I also feel that after 1950, not 1950 exactly, maybe 1955 onwards, the same women had started growing old not just physically, but also in terms of ideas. They were not thinking on new terms. So you will see that one of the most interesting things, since you mentioned how women speak the language of patriarchy, one of the most interesting uh, finding that I have is on the debate on the common civil code. So now we have a lot of, I would say, we have a fear, anxiety about the uniform civil code, and the anxiety is largely around the word uniform, which was highlighted by Professor Meenakshi in the morning when she said that we want a uniform, we want a united India, but not a uniform India. The women's movement term was common civil code, not uniform civil code. From 1937 onwards, or maybe even before that, they regularly used the word common civil code, and common in the sense that it has to, and this is something that I think we are doing a lot of disservice by not acknowledging the import of this whole thing. When they say common, they mean that we have to bring common progressive elements from every single personal law jurisdiction in this country, lower caste jurisdictions, so Dalit communities, upper caste jurisdictions, Muslim communities, Christian community, all communities, and find the best of them and create a kind of a common minimum program which will be socially progressive and gender just. So this is the term that they used. They knew it very well that the term that was being offered was uniform, and the argument for uniform civil code was made by male members in the name of the unity of the nation. So they played into their hand for some time. They, in the Constituent Assembly also, the note of dissent that they wrote, they said that we need a common civil code because this will add to the uniformity of the nation, this will add to the integrity of the nation. But they would regularly give a rider that this is not important for the sake of the integrity of the nation, but more important for gender justice. So they kept on using this, both of them side by side. But I think after 1955, somehow they dropped the word common and started accepting the word uniform. So that is how I believe their politics was somehow appropriated by the statist politics of uniform. This is one example. The other, I think, very important term that we take from them, and this I don't know how will the audience take it, is they were I rarely find in their speeches and their writings any reference, or very rarely, sometimes it does, but not many times, the idea of the nation. So for them, because they talk about the future, they very rarely talk about the nation. And the nation, because the nation was usually loaded with a lot of tradition, the baggage of the tradition that we have. We are the oldest nation. We are the world's finest culture, and so on. So that was not something that they were willing to agree. The third important, I think, position that emerges is their collaboration with Ambedkar, which is where I think there is a particular document called, since you use the word social reform, it's called Social Reform and Women's Movement in India, which I have not been able to trace its exact author's name. I found it in Renuka Ray's files. So maybe she had herself written it, or maybe she had she had got it written by the help of her other colleagues, because they also had their research assistants. This argument very clearly identifies Manusmriti as the point of departure for Indian culture. It clearly identifies that Manusmriti imagines a kind of patriarchal, Brahminical India, and as long as we abide by the values in Manusmriti, we will probably not be able to create a gender just thing. So they were very curious, and they were very, I think they were parallelly, I mean, they were not reading Ambedkar then, but simultaneously they were also identifying some of the problems or the fault lines with the Indian nation. So nation was not there. And the third very important thing, which is why I think I always refer to this, I personally think that towards equality, which is justly considered to be a very important document, but to consider it as the pioneering document, I always find that a little bit of a historical thing, because this whole idea of finding the actual socio-economic status of women, which is how we need to talk about. I believe, I was told that you are a Marxist, I don't know, but we believe, but if we really want to change the material conditions of women's life, if we really want to make a change in the world, I mean, apart from social relations and fundamental liberal rights and so on, the real material conditions of women, their the mortality rate, their health, their employment, their property, ownerships, and so on. I think this was also something that these women started as early as in 1930s with a lot of investigation, inquiries. The questionnaire that we were talking about, you see, the questionnaire had a list of almost 35 questions, which any good social scientist would have used even today to find out what is the actual status of women. So I think these are 3-4 important ways.
If I may add to this, the women's movement had a distinct setback in 85 with the Shabanu decision. Now, with the Shabanu decision, I mean, we were all witness to it, and they were processions of very well-meaning radical women who were talking about a common or a uniform civil code. And on the other hand, you had women belonging to the Muslim community saying we will be governed by the Sharia and going against the Shabanu decision. And that was the time the feminist movement had a distinct setback, because suddenly you realized that there are two things. There are goods in common which our constitution promises us, but there are also identity issues. Now, these identity issues can break solidarity.
Right.
And that was a really difficult moment for feminism, followed by many other. I think Mandal was another one on which women disagreed. So today we have to battle not only these goods, equality, fraternity, freedom and justice, we also have to battle, or rather negotiate, identity. Now, identities are normally constructed, we know it, and we also know how these are organized, but let's not go into it, because I don't want to reduce anybody to playthings of powers, but merchants of hate and cultural entrepreneurs always create divides. In that light, the women's movement has become infinitely more complicated, and it is evident. I mean, those days, 85, I remember Economic and Political Weekly carried a series of articles on women differing on the whole issue of Shabanu versus anti the Supreme Court, and then Rajiv Gandhi's government passed that law. And I still remember all of us demonstrating against it, standing outside the then Parliament was not a fortress as it is now, demonstrating against it. But he passed it, and I think one of the worst things he did. And there were women against, there were women for. And suddenly you realize that it's not only an issue of Indians, it's also a question of Hindus and Muslims, and which really, I think, for the first post-independent generation which I belong to, this was a distinct shock. But this happened, and this bedevils our politics today. So I come to the third question. If these women are members who were of the Constituent Assembly were catapulted into 2025, how would they respond to contemporary concerns of citizenship, personal and property laws, fraternity and secularism? And I talk in this specific context, I mean, I'm adding to this question of the Shaheen Bagh agitation, of anti-CAA young people. I think the Constitution received a new way of life after they held up the Constitution. That this is, and their flags in one hand, Constitution in one hand, Bhagat Singh, Ambedkar, Gandhi on the third. They created a completely new political discourse. And the discourse was not of Swaraj, the discourse was of Azadi. It's very interesting, because Gandhi Swaraj, Gandhi, when in 47, when somebody wrote to him, when are you coming back to Sabarmati? And he said, is this Swaraj? This is not the Swaraj we wanted. Everybody is competing for position. Swaraj is far, Noah Khali is nearer. And he was in Noah Khali when actually we were celebrating, or the other our founding fathers were celebrating the independence of India, they were using azadi. And sometimes I wonder whether azadi is a not a more democratic term than Swaraj, which is a sacred word of the Hindus, but which is very exclusionary. I'm sorry, I'm just wrapping up a piece on Gandhi Swaraj, and you cannot criticize that man, but as Nehru said, sometimes you have to criticize him. He's too great a man, but we must criticize him. He's so important. So, how would this play out today? The commitment of the women of the Constituent Assembly to certain values, the Hindu-Muslim institutions.
I think the earlier discussion we came to the same conclusion that women were for when they were against partition, they were against this idea of privileging a particular communal identity as your central identity. But on the other hand, it was not that they did not understand the value of protecting minorities. They understood that the constitution is, and that's one of the, I think, one of the key, I would say, philosophical point that emerges from this archival work, that they understood that the constitution is there to protect the minorities, whether they are minorities because of their religious identity, whether they are minorities because of their gendered identities, whether they are minorities because of their linguistic identity. This is something that emerges from their discussion. On the question of citizenship, I think it would be difficult to find exactly what they meant, because they knew that there is an India and Pakistan happening. Some of them were taking one position, others were taking another position. Many of them were also greatly impressed by Subhash Chandra Bose, but some of them were also very critical of him. So it's not very exact. I cannot give you an exact probably answer, but to my mind, I would suggest that they believed this whole word freedom is very important for them. Azadi, as you said, and we read that thing. They said that the Indian Women's Charter of Rights begins with the notion that freedom is the most important quality, most important public good, and you cannot take it away from us. So they would have probably used the same constitution, and they would have sat there in the Shaheen Bagh and said that you give us this freedom, even if you have, because they historically they would have connected this entire CAA, the Citizenship Amendment Act, with the same debates that were taking place in the Constituent Assembly when they were saying that Hindu women have to be returned to India and Muslim women have to be sent back to Pakistan. So they would have seen that there is a continuity. This nationalist, this communal nationalism is actually again coming back, as if the political unconscious of this nation had
It's
been.
also an issue of citizenship.
Yes.
You know, this is what is called performative citizenship compared. This is what we call performative citizenship compared to civic citizenship. They're doing it all over. They were doing it before Trump arrives on the screen and the seed, and also the screen, yeah. And these right-wing populists come because a lot of immigrants in France, for example, were burning those papers saying, "We are citizens of this country. We have given our labor." Or many of them were born in France. Now, this is performative. And Shaheen Bagh was a great example of performative citizenship. And I remember when the CAA bill was passed, and I was sitting very despondent saying, who's going to respond? The opposition was nil. And suddenly we see these kids on the street, young people like you, teaching us what is it to be a citizen and doing it for a community that they may not belong to. I mean, doing it and that is the time when fraternity, let's face it, fraternity is a gender specific term, solidarity comes to the fore. So there's freedom, there's citizenship, and there is solidarity that, look, it may not affect me, but it affects my fellow citizen. Finally, we have a notion of obligation to the state. A political community was created. There was a social contract, the constitution. We became citizens of India, but we also became fellow citizens. We entered into a political community. So we also have obligations to our fellow citizens, not only to the state. And this is great because, you know, unless you have solidarity or fraternity, take it as non-gender, you will have just a class of individuals. What binds people together is fraternity. And this is what Ambedkar meant when he introduced it. will just be, a assortment of individuals bearing rights. We will not be connected to our fellow citizens. And today, I may just comment, finally, it is precisely solidarity that is under attack. We have become indifferent to our fellow citizens, and we have become nonchalant about this young man who said they become nonchalant. I completely agree with him. I'm shocked at the way most women are talking. I mean, they were completely apolitical at one time, and suddenly they've, bucks of the prime minister and things like that. Yeah, look, what is it to if a woman is wearing a burqa? It's her choice. Why does it bother you? I know a lot of our colleagues in Delhi University started wearing the headscarf and then the burqa. That's their choice. Why do you comment upon it? It's a non-issue. So, in a way, that solidarity, that we are with you, this anti-CAA movement taught us citizenship and they taught us freedom.
I can't agree more. I just want to add one thing because we're talking about citizenship. When the article, which I think it's Article 14, which says everybody in the territory of India or all people in the territory of India are to be treated as equal. It doesn't use the word citizen. And when this particular article was debated in the Fundamental Rights Subcommittee, I think initially there was a suggestion that we insert the word citizen there. So all citizens within the territory of India were equal. But somehow, and the proceedings or the minutes of that particular day when it was passed is not very clear. So I don't know who said what. But it's very clear that Hansa Mehta and Rajkumari Amrit Kaur were present there. Ambedkar was present there. And it was unanimously finally decided that we drop the word citizen out of this. I think one of the main impetus against the anti-CA movement was that it's within the territory all of us are equal and you don't treat us as Indian citizens or citizens from outside or refugees or anyone else. So I think the idea of who is a citizen and who is not a citizen was somewhere there, but the technicality of citizenship, that somebody was to be born before such and such date and so on, that was not in the mind of women. For these women, the idea was that anybody who is in the territory of India should have the protection of the Indian Constitution, should have all the powers that the Constitution bestows upon that person.
Okay, so that is about the questions. Now, okay, a special question for the chair. How does the conundrum between individual rights and community rights play out in the contemporary context? How do we address anxieties? Oh, you going to ask me?
No.
I'm asking myself these questions.
I was just putting this.
Okay. Right. I'm sorry I missed Achyut's lecture yesterday, and I'm probably repeating what he said. But we have to understand this constitution was a product of historical struggles. So anybody who says this was a British imposition is talking nonsense. The first Bill of Rights appears in the public sphere in 1895, and nobody knows who's written it. Annie Besant said maybe Tilak has written it. Quintessential liberal Bill of Rights, first, right to freedom of expression, which is something we are missing today. In 1925, if I'm not wrong, a group of 43 eminent Indians got together and created a Bill of Rights, which they sent to the Labour Party who was governing in England. And they had the first reading. They modified it a little. And of course, India was supposed to be in the middle of, still a part of the Commonwealth. They didn't ask for freedom, for independence. 25 ki baat hai. 28 Motilal Nehru Constitution. Now, Motilal Nehru Constitution is very interesting because an all-parties committee was set up since the Secretary of State for India, Lord Birkenhead, had challenged Motilal Nehru, draw up a constitution. This is after the Simon Commission and its thing. Show me a constitution that will satisfy both Hindus and Muslims. They set up an all-party commission. They went to the Muslim League and they said, will you be a member? And the Muslim League said separate electorates. Now the Indian National Congress was of course against separate electorate. It was, firmly against the idea. And the Muslim League did not join this all-party meeting. Finally, they arrived at a compromise. So we have to understand our constitution is a product of compromises. And this compromise was, we will not give separate electorate, but minorities will have special rights. Minority rights to their culture, their religion, their religious institution. I mean, this amendment is going to break Article 30 and Article 29, which gives them the right to set up their own religious communities. So in a way, it was a compromise. There is a problem between individual and community rights. I'm not denying it. But at the same time, we have to remember an individual cannot be free if her community is being attacked. Or if you're attacked because you belong to a particular community. You see the killings in Pahalgam? Are you Hindu? Yes, you're a Hindu. Shoot them. So in a way, I have committed no wrong, but I'm killed because I'm a member of a religious community. In a way, there is a problem, and that problem we have to tackle when it arises. Many women were happy at this abolition of triple talaq. Many women were, Muslim women I'm talking about, they were unhappy with the criminalization of, Hindu men marry twice or thrice, and they are not criminalized, but Muslim men want to be criminalized. So there are too many nuances, too many knots in the issue. And of course, as a good liberal, I would say individual rights must trump community rights. At the same time, we are not individuals. We are not the individuals of Ayn Rand's Fountainhead. Most of you must have read it. I read it when I was 13 or 14. Howard Rourke. We are products of a community. We speak the language of a community. But our community, our culture, are in constant conversation with other cultures, other communities. How can we, the Hindu community, be independent of what the Mughals gave us? We speak the same language. We have the same architecture, we have the same poetry, we have the same literature. And in a way, or Sikhism, or Christianity, or Jainism, Gandhi took his non-violence from Jainism. So in a way, what we inhabit is not one community. We inhabit plural communities. We inhabit what I would call a Sanji Virasat. Our traditions are shared. Maybe I come from Punjab a little more conscious about the continuity of relationship. So it's a very, very complicated issue, and I really don't know how to answer it, except to say we have to see it as it arises. But if there is an issue of, say, honor killings, one almost always is with the individual, not with the community. You can't have khap panchayats killing young people because they want to marry. And the second one is, how do we address the issue of coexistence while tapping into the potential of fraternity? And I think the constitution makers, I may be wrong, you are a better person, they were aware, because partition was happening, they were aware that communities had been split apart since the 1920s into Hindu and Muslim. Now, how do you create a political community out of religious communities that have been at each other's throats? You had to create an alternative community, and that alternative community, to my mind, is created by the preamble. We are members of a political community in two senses, and I've said this earlier, I'll repeat it quickly. A, we are citizens of a state, we have certain rights. Secondly, we also have obligations to our fellow citizens. And that sense of solidarity, which has been rent apart by right-wing populism across the world, it's not only India, has to be restored. And I sometimes wonder, and probably I'm sticking my neck out, whether the certainties of 20th century liberal democracy have not been harmed beyond belief. We used to think we have a rule of law, we have a constitution, we have Bill of Rights, we have a civil society, we have democracy, we have an independent judiciary, an independent media. We still have them, but we are not free. Freedom. Yes, so I'll ask you to comment on this.
There's nothing. You have the last word on this. I mean,
I'm passing the buck.
No, I mean, I completely agree with you. But that's the thing about the Constitution. I believe that ideally we have a lot of things, but in practice we may not have all of them. And that's where I think I used the word Amrit Kaur used. She used the term constructive citizenship. where the citizen is not just a passive recipient of whatever the constitution of the state or the society or the community gives, but the citizen also continuously constructs the society, the state in which she or he lives. So I think that's where we all, as students, as educators, as people who work in culture, we need to keep creating or constructing this whole world that we want to live in. And the constitution is a kind of a guiding light for us.
You know, it's difficult creating a political society out of communities that have historically had a history of conflict. But we also have a history of coexistence.
So
Okay? Now, nobody understands Aurangzeb is much maligned. Aurangzeb the greatest number of grounds for temple building. The whole sacred geography of India has been created from Akbar onwards. Because they gave so much ground to what is it called? Brij Bhumi. Where the Christian Vaishnavism was originally, if I'm not mistaken, a Christian cult. In a way, therefore, there was an issue where you are. We have an issue today because history itself is being demonized. History itself is being distorted. History is much more nuanced. To come to, for example, constitutional morality. Grote said it and Ambedkar repeated Grote in the Constituent Assembly. Now, E.H. Carr, the famous historian who wrote a small little book called What is History, he said, look at this man, Grote, who was a 19th century doctor scholar, not a professional historian, he was a banker. He wrote a 6-volume history of Athens, which he said was the mother of democracy, which is true because demos is a Greek word. He says, look at this man, 6 volumes on Athenian democracy, not a single word on slavery. Now, in a way, how you couldn't have democracy in Athens till you have slavery because they were in a state of perpetual discussion. Secondly, he said Grote was not talking about ancient Athens. He was talking about Victorian England. This is H. Carr, I'm not saying it. So, in a way, each of these concepts which we have been brought up to see as holy cows have been problematized today because constitutional morality, and Ambedkar was apt. He said it is not natural to Indians, it has to be built. And that constitutional morality and fraternity, which he again and again insisted on, means that you see our fellow citizens as worthy of dignity. And there's only one way of ensuring it. We enter into perpetual conversation. I don't know how we're going to end. Today we are having a conversation and I hope, but what do you have to say about fraternity?
I mean, I understand the terms. I am a very, as I believe in the individual a little too much. And I believe that beginning with family and then, of course, community, everything is somehow or the other goes against individuals. So far as women are concerned, as Simone very famously said, that women live in their different pockets of communities, and it's very difficult for them to come together. So coming together, fraternity again is within the it's always family that is evoked when we talk about fraternity. Fraternity is not friendship. Friendship is between two individuals, and fraternity is always between two families or two kinships or two groups or two communities. So my own alternative would be to reinterpret fraternity more as friendship rather than...
You would have friendship.
I would have friendship, or I would want to use the friendship connotation of fraternity as a...
It's an interesting idea that we have friendship. Yeah, I'm impressed. No, honestly, friendship in the Aristotelian notion, you know that friendship, you don't, on the whole, betray friends. Or nor do you keep quiet if your friends are in trouble. It may be a stronger notion than fraternity. Though solidarity, I was asking somebody, when was the last time solidarity was spoken about? He said with the end of the Second World War and the demolition of the Frankfurt School, because all the Marxists spoke of solidarity. In a way, friendship would be a very good mitrata, right? Yeah, would be. What do you guys say? You're much younger. Tell us. It's a good idea.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Maitri is a very important concept.
Yes. A frater.
Ambedkar uses the word Maitri a lot.
He uses the word
right.
fraternity.
But when he writes in English, he uses fraternity. Why doesn't he use friendship?
Well, these can be synonyms. Yeah.
Right.
So we'll
I
move
think-
on.
Right. I think we need to move to the next session. Probably there is a.
Okay. So,
We have a. You be the chair of the Constituent Assembly.
all right.
And that is the chair of the drafting committee. That's
Okay.
Dr. Ambedkar sitting there. And I will just pass on. I will be the bureaucrat passing the files, and maybe I will try to see. And I think we are running short of time. We have already taken a lot of time. So we'll go to the debate on, because we have been talking about fraternity, effective relations, and friendship. So we'll directly go to the debate on the Abducted Women's Recovery Bill. I think I had identified someone to perform Durga Bai for me, and yes, you will. And you have to do the Purnima Banerjee, because you said you want to do this, and we need a Thakur Das Bhargav, who I think man. Anybody who is a very vitriolic, right-wing, angry, man, or is willing to at least perform the role of that kind of a person. Okay, if nobody is volunteering, then I.
told us to be everybody today, so
Yeah,
someone should volunteer.
somebody should volunteer, and you be Thakur Das Bhargav, who is arguing that women have to be dragged by their hair and brought to India or be sent to Pakistan, and until all the Muslim women are given back to us, we will
Doesn't
not
raise
send.
That young man hasn't quite-
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. So you have to. What we are going to do now, and on the chair is Honorable Chairperson of the Constituent Assembly, and there is the drafting committee here.
That's Patel, to get it right?
No, that's Dr. Rajendra Prasad,
You
right?
know, I just am a timekeeper. That's all.
Yeah.
We'll accommodate your question at the end of the.
Right. So we leave it for you to choose, and maybe you said you're going to volunteer, right? So I'm giving you the context. The context is very simple. Whether we should extend the date for there is a particular bill which is being debated, and the bill is to prepare a kind of a mechanism to recover abducted women. The debate has many issues. What is an abducted woman? What is abduction? Who do you define as an abducted woman? What does it mean to recover a woman? What does it mean to bring a woman back from one place to another, right? So this is the bill which has been presented by Gopal Swami Iyengar, who is the minister for this whole affair, and this bill is debated. So Thakur Das Bhargav is opposing that. He is saying that so you say this, we'll wait. And then there are two women who are arguing. I'm just giving you the context. One is Durga Bai. Where is Durga Bai? Durga Bai is here, and the other is Purnima. You are playing Purnima. So they will interrupt him, they will argue with him, and you read your debates, and maybe with all the performative zeal you have to perform it. Let's see what women have to say. Yes, you start. So you need a mic, right?
Here.
You can skip sections, whichever you think are more emphatic, because we can't go in real time.
This one.
This way.
Okay.
Thakur Das Bhargav, I support, and
Short
you-
and sharp comments, please, because we have to finish by
Yeah.
15-20 minutes.
Just for the sake of the role, I'm okay. Yeah, sir, I support the motion for the consideration of the bill, but I'm sorry, I cannot agree with all that has been said in connection with this bill by its mover. When we consider the situation as it resulted after the partition in regard to these abducted women, we cannot look at the question with equanimity. If there is any sore point for distressful fact to which we cannot be reconciled under any circumstances, it's the question of abduction and non-restoration of Hindu women. I'm sure that if abduction and non-restoration of Hindu women, I am sure that every Indian will respond to the appeal which the mover of the bill had just made that every Muslim woman should be restored. Everybody will join issue with him on this point. But at the same time, when we are considering this question, we cannot ignore what has been done in Pakistan in relation to this matter. If this is a mere matter of international morality, I think it's morality only. Yeah. With honorable mover that we should have no hesitation in restoring the Muslim girls who are to be found in India to Pakistan, even if they don't return any of our girls. But why did we enter into an agreement for this purpose? I know the genius of our people, the high morality of our people, and we are still willing to see that every Muslim girl should be restored. But all the same, when we have entered into a bilateral agreement, and with all solemnity they entered into the agreement, let us see how it has been honored in letter and in spirit by Pakistan. The honorable mover has applauded the Pakistan government. I am sorry I cannot join with him in congratulating the Pakistan government or the Pakistan officials in this respect. I don't know much about the social workers of Pakistan. If they have behaved in the manner the honorable mover of the bill has suggested to us, all honor to them. At the same time, we know that on the 3rd of September 1947, an agreement was signed between the two governments, and the ink was not dry when the Pakistan government with the Azad Kashmir government raided parts of Kashmir and took away our women. I can understand lapses in the case of a private individual. There might have been lapses on the part of Hindu and Sikhs on this side and on the part of Muslims on the other side. But for a government to be a party to this loot, to this raid upon women and property, and then to say that as a matter of fact that they were not a party to it, and ultimately to accept that they were a party to it, all this betrays a lot of things for which nobody on earth can justify the Pakistan government. In October 1947 and later on, before the ceasefire was signed, Pakistan and the forces of Pakistan perpetrated such brutalities in Kashmir that one cannot fully describe them or even think of them with equanimity. Sir, I am a very humble man.
How long? Okay.
Yeah, it's a long one.
Why don't you just sum it up?
He will not be able to sum somebody else's speech, it seems, but I'll give you one. Okay, just read this much. Okay, these figures are very important for us to remember. So from here, I should have to this place. Okay. And Durgabai will have to respond.
I should have therefore thought that if moral considerations didn't prevail with the Pakistan government, at least, mundane considerations will prevail with them. We have been told that Pakistan claimed that 50,000 Muslim girls remain in India. I don't know what the figure was which our government gave. Today it was stated that 33,000 remain there. May I submit this? I live among the people. I live in East Punjab. I know my provinces very well. I can speak with full authority so far as these 3 or 4 districts of Haryana are concerned. There are very few Muslim women who remained here. It's entirely wrong to suggest that a very large number of Muslim women are now in India. In the statement of objects and reasons, I find that many Muslim women are still here in India to be restored. It is stated a large number of such women and children still remain to be recovered. I don't know what the meaning of the expressions large number is, but I can assure the honorable mover that so far as my information goes, that statement is not very right. There may be some Muslim women in India, and we want that these should be returned. It is not that we don't want that they may be returned, but at the same time, it's wrong to suggest that there is a great number here. As regards our women in Pakistan, I don't think it's right to say that only 7,000 to 8,000 of them are now remain to be recovered.
I think we need to get it. So you see here the debate is, or the anxiety of the speaker is that he's not coming out. I believe you understand what he's not trying directly saying that do not return the Muslim women to Pakistan. And he is not even willing to admit that Indians have also abducted Muslim women. This is his large part. But you see, each time he's making his speech, and it goes on and on and on, which is what men do a lot. And I'm trying very hard not to do that. But this is exactly what happens in the Constituent Assembly, that a man will say, I understand this is the morality, but, and then this prejudice, this politics walks in. And then there are women who will speak, I think Durga Bai, and you will see Durga Bai and Purnima have very short speeches. I'm a student of literature, I again can't overemphasize the fact that some people speak more, but they are less effective than people who speak less, who are more effective. And women have this, at least in the Constituent Assembly debates, the patterns, the algorithms that emerge, it shows that they make very few remarks, but they make very significant remarks. Okay. So Durga Bhai,
Hello.
thank you so much. Thakurdas.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Greetings, Chair, the Drafting Committee, and other honorable members of the Constituent Assembly. I'm going to read shorter parts of the speech. I plead for the continuance of the recovery activity, not only because of the fact that the ordinance is going to expire and therefore a law has to be made, but because this legislation aims at restoring the status to the woman which she had before the partition and the disturbances and which she lost thereafter, whether she be Hindu or a Muslim, whether she be a citizen of India or of Pakistan. I plead for the unanimous support.
Come here, because that was the standard Constituent Assembly thing, right? Because we have to walk up down up to the rostrum and then.
Hello. I plead for the unanimous support of the House for this bill because its aim is humanitarian. It is based on humanitarian grounds, and I do not want this bill to be treated as a political issue, but it should be placed above power politics and inter-dominion bickerings. I plead for support to this bill merely on humanitarian grounds. We have reasons to believe, as the previous speakers noted, we have reason to believe that the results which we have achieved so far in our dominion are very satisfactory. Of course, it is natural that when the results are not quite complementary on the other side, doubt should arise in our minds. Why should we take up this activity? Is the responsibility that we have undertaken worth our while? Questions are also asked. Since these women are married and settled here and have adjusted themselves to the new environment and to the new relatives here, is it desirable that we should force them to go back? It is also argued. These women who have been able to adjust themselves to the new surroundings are refusing to go back, and when they are settled, it is desirable to bring suffering and misery on them by asking them to go back? These are the questions we have to answer. May I ask, are they really happy? Is the recognition true? Can there be a permanent reconciliation in such cases? Is it not out of helplessness, there being no alternative, that the woman consents or is forced to enter into that sort of alliance with the person who's no more than the person who's the murderer of her very husband, of her father, of her brother? Can she be really happy with that man? Even if there is reconciliation, is it permanent? Is this woman welcome in the family of this abductor? In many cases, it is not true that this abductor has many wives, or have not many wives but one wife, and every day there is quarrel in the house. The social workers associated with this work know the psychology of these abducted, recovered women fully well. They can testify to it that such women only welcome an opportunity to get back to their own house. Moving on. Sir, politics has been imported into this matter. I have already explained that matter. If only Pakistan does not act like us, if they have not kept their machinery in full swing, if their social workers are not of our mind, if there is no change of heart and change of policy on their part, is there any reason why we should adopt a similar policy? I have already answered that question. Let us not look at this matter from that spirit of retaliation. Let us look at this matter from this angle. If there is one woman here to be restored, this activity must continue. And our government must come forward to her aid and get her restored to her relatives. Again, sir, it is asked that there is no ordinary law of the land which is quite sufficient to deal with this matter. Why should you create a machinery of this type? But, sir, I say that the recovery activity is a complicated one. The crime of abduction of innocent women and children is a very serious one and is one that should be punished severely. From that point of view, this bill is a very harmless one. It does not try to punish even the very objects we have in view, namely the rescuing of abducted women. The abductor adopts all sorts of tricks and hides to hide the women. He tries to see that the woman is not sent back. He tries to take shelter under the ordinary law of the land by converting himself to the religion of the woman. Sometimes the woman is hidden in place. And so on.
So we have Purnima Banerjee now responding to this. I guess you have got the hang of it. So there are two terms which are being used. One is recovery and the other is restoration. Restoration is of women who are in India and they have to be restored to their original homes in what is now Pakistan. Recovery is of women who are Hindus but should have now been taken away by Pakistan. And you see, I think we couldn't replace the whole thing. If you had heard Thakurdas Bhargava completely, there are many others that were speaking, and the word retaliation that Durgabai speaks.
But did they consult these women whether they want you to be brought back?
Precisely, I think Durgabai's speech had that.
So they set up house with, sometimes with the men who had abducted them and they brought them forcefully back.
Precisely.
So this is a nation.
These are two nations fighting, and these are women who are trying to intervene. Durgabai is speaking the status language, but still trying to intervene, asking we should find out what is the actual state of mind of these women. And here is Purnima Banerjee, who is making a very short intervention, but trying to say something very important about a particular kind of women.
Sir, I am very pleased to note that this bill has not aroused any opposition on the ground that results from Pakistan regarding the recovery of women from that part of the country are not in the same proportion as is taking place in India. Sir, after the partition of this country, one of the most heinous crimes and one of the darkest chapters of our history has been the abduction of women and the troubles which have come upon their heads which were not of their seeking. Sentiments have been expressed in the House that a woman is entitled to the protection of her country and her countrymen, and this government, even though it may be helpless to enforce any very strong measures regarding the recovery of women from Pakistan, should make no bones about this matter and should declare its firm decision on the subject and see that this issue is one in which there could be no compromise. I do not wish to rouse any ill feelings between two neighboring countries, but I think we have a right to expect of ourselves firm action as also from Pakistan. Sir, there has been a question with which my esteemed colleague Srimati Durgabai has dealt, and I also would like to deal with that aspect of the matter myself. We are all agreed that women who have been abducted under the most hateful circumstances by men, who have killed their husbands, their families, would under no circumstances agree to set foot in that family or be absorbed in it. All such women must be rescued. That is the intention of the present bill. But I would like to bring to your notice a different type of case which needs our special attention. And I would like to suggest that after the lapse of full 2 years, there may be cases, and there have been cases, when girls of the tender age have been abducted or rescued by young men of the same age. Time had passed, and in between they have lived in association with one another and developed mutual attachment as young couples. They deserve sympathetic consideration, and such girls should not be made to go back to countries to which they originally belonged merely because they happen to be Muslims or Hindus, and merely because the circumstances and conditions under which they had been moved from their original homes could be described as abduction. I am sure my friend Srimati Durgabai will have no objection to such cases receiving sympathetic treatment and consideration from the tribunal which is going to sit in judgment and decide upon these cases. Sir, I fully support the objections taken by my colleague, Pandit Thakurdas Bhargava, regarding the wide powers given to the police under this bill. I feel, though I do not know what social workers who are in actual charge of the work feel, and much depends on their views. But nevertheless, I feel that after the lapse of 2 years, when the fever and fret of disturbances caused has subsided, perhaps the situation is such when we can use the normal channels of the law with greater effect in dealing with abduction cases of this nature, that it is my opinion would give greater safety and liberty to the individuals who are brought under the clutches of that law but who may not be offenders. I feel, sir, that to indemnify police officers and to allow even assistant sub inspectors to effect arrests without warrant, these are very wide powers which no legislature should freely give to any police authority very freely. I will not press that point very much because at the amendment stage there is still an opportunity to deal with necessary amendments. Before I close, I would like to add a word about the tribunal which you are to constitute. I believe that superintendents of police from both dominions are to sit on this tribunal. I fully agree that a high official of that nature, knowing the conditions, the police conditions of the two dominions, should be consulted, who would know also the circumstances under which women had been abducted and the circumstances under which they should be released. Along with them, to accommodate such human cases where people have developed genuine attachment and do not want to leave each other, I believe, like Srimati Rameshwari Nehru, who has worked very well in this department. I believe, sir, Srimati Rameshwari Nehru takes this view of abducted persons of this category, and if a person like her has any difference of opinion with the procedures we have adopted in this bill, I personally feel that her point of view should be respected. My point is that there should be persons on the tribunals who would give sympathetic treatment to cases of genuine attachment, cases in which two persons would wish to continue to live as man and wife. With this qualification, I fully support this legislation and would desire that every woman who has been abducted should be taken back to her home. There is no question of retaliation. There is no question of how many people Pakistan has recovered and how many people India has recovered. It is absolutely the right of every woman to go back to her original home. Sir, I support the bill and I hope that the wide powers given to the police will be amended suitably when the clause by clause consideration takes place.
I think it was a very truncated reconstruction of something, but using the original words of the participants. What is emerging here is very clearly that now we have started talking about India and Pakistan in terms of international relations as neighboring countries, as tribunals where people can sit together and decide. We are seeing what is the role of the police in doing this. As ma'am asked, there is also at least Purnima Banerjee, even in Durgabai's speech, these two women are pleading for considering what the woman wants, whether we can actually find out whether the woman wants something or not, what is her consent, what is her agreement, and what is her desire. And a lot of this entire speech coming from two women in an assembly of men is full of words like affection, love, sympathies, and so on. I think this is a moment which I just wanted you to keep in mind when we think of the effective turn which I said about the making the constitution. This also is probably one of those speeches, one of those sessions. If we very patiently read this, we can probably find something to address the question of fraternity here. But what it leads to again is the question of religion. Because this is about Hindu and Muslim. This is and you can see. I mean, I don't know why I couldn't find that exact number. There was a huge furor, and there were many other people who were speaking. But the exact thing was about numbers. So they killed our 28 people in Kashmir. We will destroy these many camps there. They have 55 nuclear missiles. We have these many. You see, almost the same thing is happening here in 1949, and this debate is happening on. I should have told you 15th of December 1949. So the constitution is already drafted. Okay, it has been decided and the same people are now debating this bill. This bill has been debated for some time now, but this was the last debate. Now we come to the question of religion. This is another very important debate that the legislative role constitution was discussing. So we have the Hindu Code Bill. I think what is the date? So we have Dr. Ambedkar, who is the chairperson of the drafting committee as well as the law minister. He is presenting the Hindu Code Bill. So he will present the Hindu Code Bill and then this is the last speech today because we will go into all the discussions. I think these two debates will be able to help us understand why it is important to go to these archives to understand what secularism really meant, what secularism meant in the context of international relations, what secularism meant in the relation between state and the citizen, or our mutual obligations to each other. Purnima Banerjee's speech foregrounded that very well. So, yes, Honorable Minister.
I'll go there.
Yeah.
Sorry, how much time do we have now?
This will finish in 15 minutes. Probably.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it even shorter. It's such a huge document, so I'm just quickly trying to go through this. So, so this was Dr. Ambedkar presenting the Hindu code, some of the provisions, and he says he finds it a matter of great pity. Well, I find it a matter of great pity and also great regret, both for myself and for the members, that such an important measure as the codification of Hindu law should come for discussion at the fag end of the session. Well, that's pretty much the fag end of the day today. And he says, you know, for something as important as this, we should have at least 5 hours set apart, which we don't. We've got 10 minutes. So anyway, we'll try and get into this in the best possible way. So a couple of issues which I sort of just picked out as I was going through this for the first time. One is that in the Hindu, property act, the bill, there were 2 systems primarily. One was called Mitakshara and the other is Daya Bhag. Now, Mitakshara basically said that the property does not belong just to an individual but to the father, son, grandson, great grandson, all these people. It's a broader thing. And the other is Daya Bhag, under which the property is held by the heir, only by the direct heir, as his personal property, with an absolute right to dispose of it either by gift or by will or any other manner. So the fundamental change, which I think Ambedkar, and please correct me, Professor, if I haven't gone through the whole document, so I'm sort of inferring things here. But Ambedkar's pain seems to come from this fact that they wanted to extend the Daya Bhag rule, which is basically going to give the property only to the direct heir and not the Mitakshara, which made it more of a community kind of stake. So that was one point, which he was agitated about. And in addition, he says this bill seeks to make 4 changes. One change is that the widow, the daughter, the widow of a predeceased son, all are given the same rank as the son in the matter of inheritance. In addition to that, the daughter is also given a share of her father's property. But there is something here, if I understand correctly, that they can only get 50% of what is given to the son. So the third change he talks about is, yes, the discrimination against the female heirs. Whether a female was rich or poor in circumstances at the death of the testator, whether she was married or unmarried, whether she has a child or not, all these considerations which led to discrimination in the female heirs will now be abolished. This he was happy about. And then he goes on to the question of women's estate. And he says, as members of the House will know, under the Hindu law, where a woman inherits property, she gets only what is called a life estate. She can enjoy the income of the property but cannot deal with the corpus of the property except for legal necessity. And therefore the property must pass after her death to the reversioners of her husband. So here again the bill is trying to introduce 2 changes. One is that it converts the limited estate into an absolute estate, just as the male gets when he inherits an absolute estate. So this gives more rights to the women. And Then there is an issue around dowry, and I'll stop with this because there are more issues, but we'll come to the dowry one, which is the last one. All members of the House know what a scandalous affair this dowry is. How, for instance, girls who bring enormous lot of property from their parents, either by way of dowry or stridan or gifts, are treated nonetheless with utter contempt, tyranny, and oppression. The bill provides, in my judgment, one of the most salutary provisions, namely that this property, which is given as a dowry to a girl on the occasion of her marriage, shall be treated as a trust property, the use of which will ensure to the woman that she is entitled to claim that property when she comes to the age of 18, so that neither her husband nor the relations of her husband will have any interest in that property, nor will they have an opportunity to waste that property and make her helpless for the rest of her life. So two things here. One is that when she becomes 18, so the assumption is she gets married well before she's 18. And then this is a kind of an insurance for her. I'm actually going to stop here, and then we can have thoughts and comments around this.
Perfect. So, thank you, Dr. Ambedkar. So, we have the Hindu Code Bill, which has been now presented by the Law Minister. Any responses to this? Any visual responses? Because here is a, as Pandavati Karamaya says, this is a Dalit man reforming Hindu law. Not something that is but one of the, apart from the objections to Ambedkar, there are certain objections to the very content of the bill that. So, one speech that we presented by Hansa Mehta, who is the common sense of Ambedkar. So, this is the larger format in which these discussions are taken. The minister proposes and other people get up and they read it.
Then with regard to divorce, even that from the point of view of some does not go far enough. There is, however, one thing that I would like to bring to the notice of the members of the select committee, and that is the time given to desertion. If a man or a woman deserts his or her spouse, it has been provided he or she can divorce her or him after 5 years. 5 years is the period given in the code. Even in Narad Smriti, it is given that a childless woman should wait for 3 years. After 3 years, she can marry again. So why not bring that particular provision here, that if a woman is childless, she need not wait till 5 years, but can divorce her husband after 3 years. If a woman has got children, then 5 years would be the right period, but for a childless woman, 3 years would be a reasonable period. With regard to guardianship, here also the code has not made any changes in the present law. Father is the natural guardian of the children. The mother does not come in. We would like the mother also to be a co-guardian of the children with the father. With regard to adoption, I think the whole chapter should be scrapped. We are a secular state. We want to be a secular state. Adoption in Hindu law is for religious purposes. Why should a secular state have anything to do with a religious custom? What are we concerned with is whether adoption, which is for religious purposes, should be recognized by the state for purposes of inheritance. We say that it should not. If a child is adopted, whether it is a boy or a girl, we would like a daughter also to be adopted. If a child is adopted not for religious purpose but for real purpose, that is the parents want a child, then the child should have the same rights as the neutral child. But if there is adoption for religious purposes, only then I think that adoption should not be recognized for purposes of inheritance. We have looked too much to the past. We must now look to the future. It is for the future generation that we are making this law. It is not for us, but for the future generation that is coming after us that this law will be applied. We have to look for the future conditions. After all, it is the conditions that determine the law. The law reflects the society. The law reflects the condition in which the people live. We have to see
that the future reflects the condition in which, we have to see that the future generation is not fettered by our own prejudices with regard to marriage or divorce or with regard to any other ideas that we may have today. I hope the select committee will consider that and produce a bill which will be a great boon to the future Hindu society.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Hansa Mehta. I think if you pay attention to this, Hansa Mehta is regularly using the word secular. To say that Indian Constitution doesn't use the word secular and they did not say a secular constitution, I'm repeating it once again. This is Ambedkar's bill, and Hansa makes two important points. One is when she says that the bill is not going far enough, because it is giving certain rights but not giving enough rights. And the second is a very, very specific pointed objection that she is making to the bill that Ambedkar was presented, in which only daughters are supposed to be adopted. You cannot adopt a female child. Sons are adopted and female children are not adopted. And Hansa is saying, why should we want to be a secular state? Adoption in Hindu law is for religious reasons. Why should a secular state have anything to do with a religious custom? What we are concerned with is whether adoption for religious purposes should be recognized by the state for purposes of inheritance. So she is clearly trying to draw the discussions towards secularization of the society and saying that the state should not even consider something which is done for the religious purpose. So this is where, and the last part of the speech regularly refers to the future rather than asking us to look to the past. I think this is where we will end today. For the last speech, we have 5 minutes, and then I will probably make my concluding remarks. We have the last speech that Durgabai delivered in the Constituent Assembly. After the final draft constitution was agreed upon, Durgabai gave her own remarks. So some extracts from that will be presented by Durgabai. Now you make your selections. Hansa has said we have looked too much to the past. I think we are looking into the past again.
President, drafting members, and other honorable members of the Assembly, in the spirit of the founding mothers, I think the President has often been referred to as Sir. So when I speak out this debate, I'll make sure to the best of my ability to refer to you as Ma'am. Miss President, Ma'am, the speakers who have preceded me have placed before you, in a highly learned way, an exhaustive analysis of the constitutional setup which this country is going to have. Ma'am, I have no intention to repeat them firstly, because I do not claim to have that legal or constitutional wisdom to say anything by way of throwing further lights on the points already placed before this House. I also think that at this stage, it is better to look forward than look backward and dissect this constitution in a theoretical way to find out either the merits or the defects of it.
You see, this is again Hansa Mehta and this is Durgabai. Both of them are saying the same thing, that we have to look to the future rather than to the past.
Ma'am, there is only one standard by which we have got to judge this constitution. The purpose of a democratic constitution is to find a device and to establish a machinery to find out the general will of the people and also to give scope for the general will to prevail. Does this constitution fulfill this object? That is the point to be considered. Ma'am, with the franchise extended to all the adults and with the ample checks provided to control the executive and the fundamental rights solemnly guaranteed by this constitution, I do not think any fair-minded person would say that this constitution does not fulfill that democratic purpose, that it does not establish the scope and opportunity for the will of the people to dominate in the administration of the affairs. May I say, ma'am, that it is not or should not be the purpose of the makers of the Constitution to give the color of a particular political ideology to the Constitution, and it is well that it is left to the people, and the people should be left alone. And they should be the people, they should be the masters to shape the destiny of this country and also to mold their machinery as they like, as long as they hold the field. It would have been wrong on the part of the makers of the Constitution to have given that kind of color, or to put a kind of interpretation of a particular brand of political philosophy to tile provisions that are embodied in this constitution. What the constitution should do is to give the people sufficient and free scope to canvass their own particular brand of ideology and give them the means to make their own opinions prevail, as long as they have got a voice in the administration of the country. Thank you. Well, there's a
Thank you. I think there was the last section where she thanks for last.
Last but not the least, I want to say that I have just read the decision of the Government of India this morning in the papers that they have created facilities to bring about the Andhra province at an early date. They have done well in leaving the details to be worked out by a partition council, and that the center would not interfere with them. I am very glad about it, and I hope that the partition council, which might be created, will not do anything that is injurious to the peaceful and quiet life which the people are enjoying hitherto. Thank you.
I think we have come to the final session, and so we have tried to do a kind of a recreation of the Constituent Assembly in all its roles. The one thing that we missed was the committee's proceedings, but we think we've done this. So I will not have the final word. I'm leaving it to Dr. Ambedkar, who has been listening to the chairperson of the drafting committee, to all the debates, to all the issues and concerns. So if Dr. Ambedkar would come in the avatar of a woman today, or as a feminist today, he was a feminist, but a very true color feminist, what would be the kind of constitution that he would have drafted?
I have the mic. Thank you. So I'm going to keep morphing between Dr. Ambedkar and just being this woman, citizen of this country standing in front of you. And I think I'm just going to share with you very quickly what are some of the key things that kept coming through in this entire discussion. And really, I'll keep stepping out of the Ambedkar space, because I think what the women had to say was as important, if not more, in shaping what eventually Dr. Ambedkar spoke about and said. So I think some of the things that really stood out, in the last today's discussion, and some of it yesterday, was this entire emphasis on the future, not the past, which showed that these women held their roles and responsibilities as visionaries for the future of this country, and they took it very, very seriously. So this is very important, because especially nowadays the rhetoric on what the past of this nation and this country has been is so strong that there's very little space for focusing on the now. So that was one point. Secondly, any transformation is a progression. And what these incredible women did as a part of this was to sow the seeds. I think all of us are able to sit here, have these open discussions, because there were those brave women and so many more who continued to chip away at that patriarchal silo which held this country for so long. And I think this is a wake-up call for all of us, that we have to keep chipping away no matter where we are. We can't allow the clouds to, sort of close us in again. So I think this is another very key point which kept coming. The third thing was that the individual is as important as the state. The moment you have this idea of a uniform state, somewhere individual rights, liberties, diversity, all of this begins to get diluted. And I think the constitutional mothers were very, very conscious about this fact, that the individual rights in this democracy are as important, if not more. So that's another thing for us to keep remembering in this, painting the whole world in the same color time. The other thing is about institutional mechanisms to safeguard the values of justice, freedom, equality, liberty, fraternity. If you have a constitution which does not help to create institutional mechanisms, then this can be literally opened up to the whims and fancies of people who want to interpret it this way or the other. And I think and this credit goes not just to the women, but all the people who were there working on this very, very important foundational document, is that they were very, very conscious of what mechanisms they can, put into it, embed into it, that we can continue to draw from. And so when she talked about how this young, Neeraji, about this young generation of youngsters suddenly stand up with copies of the Constitution and remind us of some of the language, the institutional safeguards, that wasn't an accident. That was probably the vision they had, that maybe 50 years, 60 years down the line, if these sort of situations are to come, this document will be there to safeguard their rights. So I think that's very, very important. And the last bit here is, the line which says, we have given this to ourselves. If we have given this to ourselves, that means you and I, all of us who have emanated from that time, if we have given this to ourselves, then it is up to us to uphold this too. And I think that's a very, very important. So don't think you are a limited, powerless individual in this vast ethos of a nation. But because the fundamentals are something we have given to ourselves, that gives us the power, that gives us the right, that gives us the strength and the solidarity to uphold what we think this nation's democracy means. And so these incredible mothers of the Constitution came as voices of reason, voices from the heart, voices of collaboration. Even though they may have had individual differences, they kept thinking of the larger good. And I think most importantly, they were the upholders of the collective consciousness of this country. So I think those were some of the takeaways. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Over to you.
I think we are coming to the end of this part of the journey and the beginning, launching the beginning of the next part of our collective journeys. At times like this, they're very profound moments. They don't happen very often when we are doing events. But we all leave this room, at least I do, and I know my team of, shall I say, elves does, that, we all take away a bit of each other with us. And I think that's what Lakshmi so evocatively highlighted. I have nothing cerebral to share with you, except that while we were conceiving this, it really grew out of an engagement with Achyut's book soon after it was printed. And for some reason, I just couldn't get the book out of my system. And I kept thinking back. I have members of my own family who've been part of the students' movement, of the national movement. But more importantly, I kept thinking back about my grandmother. While my grandfather was in jail, while he was working with as a member of the Constituent Assembly, even before that, the struggles, the lives they gave up. It was really my grandmother who sustained this family. She was a principal of a school. She was 28 years old when she got married, which at that time was a rarity. And when all the time that my grandfather was in jail, she and her 3 daughters were left alone to fend for themselves. And as it is today, people in power don't speak to people who are dissidents. So they faced ostracism. They believed in khadi. My mother, I remember my mother telling me that they used to have 2 lehengas. In the south, they wear something known as pavare. They used to have 2 of khadi, and they would wash one, walk back from school, wash the other, and that was the kind of austerity that they learned, that they grew up in. And through all of this, I believe, my grandmother never once told my grandfather, "Why are you doing this?" She sustained the family. So who was the real freedom fighter? between the two. The one who was out in the public sphere, she too was in the public. I mean, a member of the All India Women's Conference. I know it's sort of vain to be biographical, but this book propels you to make what is political personal and recognize that the personal is political. So in a sense, I lived with this book for a long time. It spoke to me at different times. It spoke to me at times when I was down and out. It spoke to me at times when I was high. And then this author who kept saying that I didn't really write the book, but the book wrote itself through me. I was so completely intrigued by it. And then I said, what is this man doing? He's taught at Columbia, he's taught at Cornell, he's invited all over the world, and then he chooses to teach in Dumka. I have to find this pearl. I have to meet him. So, of course, generation separates us, otherwise I would have called it a love story. And it would be a reverse in a love story. So that's how this whole thing began. Very personal and yet very political. And I had been reading, thanks to scholars like Neera and my friends Rajiv, Bhargav, and Mirja Gopal Jayal, Sridharan, Zoya, Hassan. All of these people had been engaging with the Constitution. But it was when I came across the young people, post Rohit Day, who started looking at the Constitution very differently, as a people's constitution, as the colonial constitution. Arghyo has said that. I think a colleague of Arghyo is here. So then I said, look, these people are rediscovering it, and perhaps the constitution lends itself to this continuous dialogue that Achyut talked about, this continuous ability to look inward, to be reflective, to be reflexive, and know that what really makes a difference is not the monuments that you inscribe in stone, but what you weave into the lives of others. And so I think we go back with this very sobering or very uplifting, something that is always exalting is equally sobering, and which is that I think the founding mothers were able to experience the beauty of a bud unfolding as much as they could experience the pain on our planet. And I think in a sense that excitement of possibilities, but grounded in the realities of the day. That's a very difficult balance. We don't do it in our ivory towers. We also don't do it just with grassroots. There has to be some kind of what Dilip Simeon has called that special balance between forgetting and remembering. And also the fact that while we must comfort the afflicted, we definitely must, we also need to afflict the comfortable, especially when they are a little arrogant about their comforting shibboleths. I think that's what Achyut Chetan, that's what the Neera Chandoks of the world exhort us to do all the time. And so I go back to my grandmother, and a beautiful poem that a student of mine once wrote. Too many women in too many countries speak the same language of silence. And I want to forget the sorrows of my grandmother's silence. So that's where I'd like to end this, and I want to thank you all for being here, being such an integral part of this. I believe we're going to do this every year. I believe we're going to get more and more younger people engage with this document that speaks to each of us in different ways. It leaps out to us in some pages, it makes us sit back in others, but it sings a song. Sings a song in some senses that I think resonates in our inner Tanpura in many ways, for all of us as Indians, regardless of which spectrum of the ideology we belong to. So once again, deep, deep gratitude for sparing time to be with us on this journey.